Welcome to this very important first part of a three-part series on the baby crisis. In this series, we are going to discuss what the baby crisis is, how we solve it like Tesla would solve it, and how we create a baby master plan that changes the world if we do it right. So first of all, what is the baby crisis? Well, it's not a small crisis like a baby crisis. No, I'm talking about the crisis of babies and the crisis of a lack of babies. Because our civilization is facing extinction and decline if people can't reproduce. And if you think that's not happening, the lack of reproduction, let me correct you. It is happening on a massive scale, and it's becoming the biggest problem all of us will face very soon. And if you follow my channel, you know that I believe Elon is very smart and Elon does great things. So Elon himself says civilization is going to crumble if people don't have more children. It's actually not rocket science, no pun intended, with SpaceX, but it's not rocket science to understand. If we don't have children, we will not exist in the future. And if you look at global fertility rates, look at this. Look at this disaster. This is a disaster chart. Here is 3 children in average per woman. In case you didn't do the math, you need 2.1 children per woman in order to remain stable as a population. If the average woman has less than 2 children, she needs to replace herself and the dude. And if she has less, you need 2.1, a little bit more than 2, because there are people who cannot have children. There are children, unfortunately, dying. So you need 2.1. Now look at this. Europe is the yellow line. Europe fell from nearly 3 in 1950 to some horrible number. It actually went up a little bit here, but it's way below 2. So Europe is on the path of dying out. North America, look at this, had the baby boom, right, in the 60s and 50s. And then the baby boomers took care that this thing falls through the floor and is now approximating Europe. And that's North America, right? That includes Canada. So these two are on the way out. And then you see Asia, especially driven by East Asia, Japan, South Korea, and China. And you see this, they had so many children. And then China introduced one-child policy. It falls totally through the floor. Japan and South Korea are completely screwed. We are going to discuss it in a second. And so on and so forth. And then you see the world. Look at the world. Boom. It's going down, and it's going to pass through this 2 replacement rate also in the 2060s or something. And the only continent that is pushing against it is Africa. But if you're a fan of civilization, you are asking yourself, why are the most advanced civilizations completely dying out, while the least advanced civilization is like trying to stem the tide, but is also projected to totally die out at some point? So we are on a very unsustainable path. And if you like the countries you live in, this is very sad. I love the countries we live in. I love Europe. I love the US. I also like East Asia. Why are we letting this die out? This is ridiculous. And look at South Korea as the leading problem here in terms of baby crisis. It's a national security issue. They are so bad that they will have national security issues. They will face an implosion of their civilization very, very soon because they have a super low birth rate. And it's a warning to the world. That's what experts say all over the place. This is the world's biggest risk. It's not even nuclear war. It's definitely not global warming. It is this. This is the most guaranteed giant implosion problem we are facing if we don't do anything about it. So nearly every country to shrink by 2100. But if you take Africa out of the equation, you can basically say nearly every country shrink by 2040. That's very soon. But there's also a personal tragedy here. Let's not just always talk about civilization. It's a personal tragedy. So one of the effects of this is 45% of women between 25 and 44, so young women, 45%, nearly half of them will be single and very likely childless by 2030, which is in 5 years. So that is a personal tragedy. It's not that young women don't want to be single and alone, especially not with 44. It's very bad. So all these problems of declining civilizations are just one part of the equation. The other part is a personal tragedy of unprecedented proportions, if you ask me. And we are calling ourselves the richest nation and the richest, civilization in history. We are too dumb to have babies, and we create a giant problem for all of us, both in decline and in personal crises. That is ridiculous and needs to be solved. The only way to solve it is the Elon way. And the Elon way is the first principle of looking at the world and understanding why things are happening. What is the big picture drivers behind it? What are the central mechanics behind the baby crisis? And that's what we want to do in this video, to understand what the hell is happening and why do people not have babies anymore? Is it that they don't want babies anymore? The short answer to that is no. That is, of course, not true. We're humans, and our central purpose in life is to have a lot of babies. That is deeply ingrained in our DNA, that is deeply ingrained in our existence. And so we can't change that easily. There are always outliers and mutations, right? There are some people who don't want babies. That's was always true. And by definition, they die out with each generation. So the people who exist are the people who tend to want a lot of babies. So it's not the people. The people and our needs and wants are not the problem. And I want to go to three things that are often blamed nowadays to be the problem that I don't think are the problem, and I think I can prove it. The first one is people say dating is broken. And they say, well, people can't find partners anymore. You go on Tinder, everyone ghosts you and no one responds. If you're a man, if you're a woman, you get all these stupid guys like hitting on you and no one, it's a total mess. Tinder is to blame why we don't have babies anymore. I think that is completely wrong. And I try to prove my points with very simple arguments that are powerful arguments, logical arguments. If dating would be the problem, then all the people who have found their partner would have 4 or 6 children, right? Because we are saying dating is the problem. No, but what you see is even after you find your partner, even after you get married, you don't have children. You don't have enough children. So that is an indicator that all our crazy dating problems, right? The behavior of women that the men complain about, the behavior of men that women complain about, are actually not upstream of the baby problem. I think they are downstream of the baby problem. I think all our insane dating behavior is a function of the fact that the central purpose of dating, which is babies, has been taken away for some reason through something. And once the babies are gone, everyone in dating loses their marbles. We are losing our metrics and our guidelines and our reference points, how we should behave in dating. There's no discipline anymore. Women say, oh, he needs to be 6 foot and he has to look like Brad Pitt, otherwise I'm not going to do anything. I mean, that's completely nuts, of course, but it's a function of, well, if there's no goal, I can go all nuts. And men's like, oh, I do all kinds of stuff. I'm just going to try to hit up as many women as possible and have like sex with them. And I don't care about anything. Why? Because the central purpose is taken away. If men and women would come together with the objective to have a lot of babies, they would become much more disciplined, because then you need a plan. Then you need discipline. Then other things than just looks matter. By taking away the babies, we take away all rules and discipline from dating. So dating is not the problem. The dating problems are a function of the baby problem. Number 2, people blame feminism, of course. They say, well, feminism has infiltrated the minds of young women. It's the mind virus. It tells them to have careers and not be moms, to mistreat men and be mean. Okay, I get it. Looks like it from the outside. But there's a very simple argument why feminism is not the problem. It might be a big problem, but it's not the driving problem. And that simple argument that shows feminism is not the problem for the baby crisis is East Asia. The countries with the biggest baby problem are the least feminist countries. Japan and South Korea are not known to be, bastions of third wave feminism. So clearly, there is something else going on. Feminism, as someone put it, I know, is an after-the-fact cope. Of course, once you realize you can't have children, you become a little angry and then you're a feminist. Sure. It's not the other way around. So feminism is also downstream of the baby problem. As East Asia shows, you don't need to be a feminist to have a baby problem. And finally, politics. Some people say, well, it's because our countries are so bad in paying for leave, for work leave, and protecting moms and do all these things. Well, very simple argument why this is also wrong and not the driver of the baby problem. The countries who have the most accommodating support for young moms and dads, Scandinavia, Germany, they have the biggest problem, one of the biggest problems in the West in terms of birth rates. So clearly, government aid is not going to help anything here. And we can go into the details why that is. So what is the problem? Well, when I started talking to people about this, and you talk to young women who are the centerpiece of the solution, because if young women say they don't want to have children, nothing goes, right? Because men can't do anything about it. And the answer, if you go into a college and ask a young college girl, let's say 21, why don't you have 4 children? Just go on a college campus and do this. First of all, everyone will think you're nuts, because they will think like, are you crazy? Like, what are you talking about? But then you dig deeper. It's like, well, don't you like children? Like, of course I like children, but I can't have them right now. I can't even pay for my own apartment. I don't even know, I'm in student debt. I have to work at Starbucks, right? And who's going to pay for my babies? I can't pay for it. And then I look around and see all the dudes I'm supposed to date, and they're not going to pay for it because they're broke too. So that's it. End of discussion. It's not even possible. So clearly, we are talking about an economics problem. And that's the big insight here. The core of the Western and Far Eastern baby crisis is that having babies is so complicated and perceived expensive and perceived risky that women just say, it's not even worth thinking about it. I can't. And a simple thought experiment tells you that this is true. If you go on a college campus and say to a woman, I give you $100 million into an escrow account, and you are going to get, let's say, $500,000 a year paid out. But in exchange, you have to have 4 kids and live in a giant house, and you can do whatever you want. How many women are going to opt into that? How many women are going to say, if you give me $500,000 a year, and you explain to them this is enough to pay for everything, you give them a list of expenses and everything, you can be a mom, you get paid for it, get a giant house, you can hire all kinds of helpers. Would you have 4 children, or 5, or 6? A shocking number of women would say, of course, are you kidding me? So that shows you that money seems to be the problem here. And let's break down what that means in terms of, economic risks and everything. When we talk about money, what does this exactly mean on a first principle basis? What is money? Well, now money is 3 things. Money needs to first be there. It's about the numbers. You do some math, you figure out, oh, I need $8,000 a month or whatever if I had 4 kids after taxes to spend. That's great. So you need a certain number to make things work. Okay? Not too surprising. But second, economics are always about risk. If I give you the certain number, what is the risk that you don't get that number next month? So it's not enough to pay women money. They also need to be reliant on that. They need to be able to rely that they will get the money in the future for about 20 years, because that's how long it takes to, get your babies done. So risk is the next thing. How do we de-risk this situation? And the last one is complexity, right? Because right now our society basically tells women, oh, you can have it all. You can have 100 million. You can have it at no risk. The only thing you need to do is to earn 100 million. Okay, at that point, you're putting a level of complexity on young women that is completely ridiculous. Right? You're saying like, oh, why don't you go to law school, become a super lawyer, run for president, win the presidency, then become, speak for Goldman Sachs, and I pay you 100 million, boom, done. That's not a reasonable pitch. That would solve your money problem. That would solve your risk problem. But the plan you're presenting to women is insane. So complexity is very important, right? In my example, there would be no risk because I give you 100 million. There would be no complexity. All you have to say is yes. And the numbers are great. That's why my example is an extreme example that shows, okay, if you solve these 3 problems, you have solved the problem. Then you would reveal the true want and need of most women, which is stay home, be moms, have a lot of children, if these things would be taken care of. So that little thought experiment shows you that what people truly want is babies. What they truly need is financial safety. Then we would have solved the problem. Now, maybe you think some of these things I just said are trivial, but they're not, because each of them is a first principle. We can be sure that they are true. That is the point of first principles, to construct a framework with very few central principles that we can be sure are true. And once we know that framework, we can engineer a target reality around it. That's the beauty of it. That's how Elon built these amazing rockets and Tesla and is building the robot revolution. So, in summary, we now know the baby crisis is our biggest problem, personally, spiritually, and civilizationally, also economically. We also know it's probably the biggest opportunity in the world because it's the biggest need of people. We also understand what's behind the baby crisis. It is a level of economic insecurity and complexity and risk for women that is completely unacceptable. And if we don't solve that, we will not solve the baby crisis. But if we do solve it, we might have the biggest business model in the world because someone is willing to pay for this a lot of money. You can guess who, but we are going to get into that later. Now we know what the framework is. In the next video, we are going to discuss how we make babies like Tesla makes robots. And I'm not talking about actuators and batteries and AI. I'm talking about the meta principle of turning insights like that into a model, into an economics model and a pragmatic model that gets the job done. So I hope to see you in part 2 of the baby crisis. And there we are going to find out how we solve this mess. See you then.